Legends of ape-like men wandering mysteriously through the forest can be found all around the world. Whether it's the Yeti in the Himalayas, or whether it's Bigfoot or the Sasquatch in North America, or whether it's the Yowie right here in Coonabarra Brand. The Yowie is a fascinating part of Australian folklore and history. It began with Aboriginal oral history and survived all the way through to the present day. In fact, when British colonies came to Australia, they too gave reports of encountering these ape-like men. In 1882, Sir Henry James McCooey wrote the following about his encounter. A few days ago, I saw one of these strange creatures on the coast between Bateman's Bay and Ulladulla. I should think that if it were standing perfectly upright, it would be nearly 5 feet high. It was tailless and covered with very long black hair. I threw a stone at the animal, whereupon it immediately rushed off. It's impressive how long-lasting the legend of the Yowie has been in Australia. In fact, if you walk down a confectionery aisle in a grocery store, you might even spot a chocolate Yowie. But even more impressive is the concentration and huge number of sightings of the Yowie in the Coonabarabran, Warrumbungles, and the Pilliga Scrub. In 1979, an article was written on the numerous reports truck drivers were giving on encounters with the Yowie along the Newell Highway. So many stories had begun to spread that some truckers even took the initiative to put up a sign north of Coonabarabran saying, "Beware, Yowies for next 121 kilometers." As recent as 2009, the Coonabarabran Times wrote of a bus transporting a regional children's choir that had a close encounter with the Yowie. The mysterious figure came right up next to their bus before running back into the forest. In 2020, the Coonabarabran Times also published another article on the prevailing legend of the Yowie and how this ape-man has yet to have been properly found, and yet his story is still with us today. The local stories of the Yowie in Coonabarabran and across Australia aren't going away anytime soon, and this shouldn't surprise us. Stories of ancient ape-men have been around since ancient history. 1st century Roman author Pliny wrote in his book Natural History of the satyrs, who were supposedly living in the mountains of Western India. These creatures were referred to as forest people or wild people by locals. In Greek myth, the satyr was a half-human, half-animal creature. But since no creature has ever been found, most historians believe Pliny had mistakenly identified just ordinary apes as mythological satyrs. The Chinese believed in a godlike monkey, King Sun Wukong, said to be born from a stone and possessing incredible magical powers. The Monkey King is the central character of the very famous Journey to the West novel, which has been adapted into several different mediums. Closer to Australia, the country of Indonesia referred to ape-human hybrids who lived in the jungle as orang-utang, which literally means man of the woods. But as we've discovered, these stories of ape-like men, satyrs, orangutans, men of the woods, all turned out to just be ordinary animals. Now, that doesn't exclude the possibility that a half-man, half-ape hybrid like the Yowie exists, but it does call into question how likely that is. And it does go to show we're yet to have found any concrete proof or evidence for the Yowie's existence. Stories and myths of ape-men are relatively harmless, but a belief in half-human, half-animal hybrids was so prevalent throughout history that it actually changed how we view ourselves as humans. Because stories of these ape-men were everywhere, many people began to believe that there was a common ancestry between apes and humans. For example, this sketch from a 1699 book portrays a pygmy or orangutan holding a cane, standing almost completely upright like a human and giving a cheeky smile. This type of thinking in the sciences became widespread, and so by the time Charles Darwin proposed his theory of evolution and that humans had in fact descended from apes, the stage was already set for people to accept and embrace this idea. For hundreds of years, people had already believed that there was a close connection between man and ape. But this belief that humans descended from apes had detrimental effects. Many began to believe that if humans evolved from apes, that some humans must be more civilized and superior than others. Charles Darwin's famous book on the origin of species even admitted to the fact that in an evolutionary worldview, there are superior and inferior races. The full title of his book, which many forget, is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Well, I want to thank you, Sven, for joining me to talk about this important topic. And before we dive in, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you have an interest in this topic?
I really enjoy the interface between science and faith, particularly in the area of where we came from. And I guess it goes back all the way to when I was at high school. I loved biology, I loved chemistry, I loved physics, I loved all of the sciences.
Does this theory have anything to say about humanity as a race or a species? Does it have anything to say about, I suppose, our purpose in life or the value of human life? Does it have anything to contribute there?
Really important to remember that science in and of itself doesn't deal in the area of values and meaning and purpose. Science really is just explaining how things work. So for example, if you were to look at the planet Saturn or Jupiter, and I know that Coonabarabran is the astronomy capital of Australia, and of course Coonamble pretty close as well. But the reality is that science has nothing to really say about whether Jupiter is more valuable than Saturn. And so in the same way, what the evolutionary process is really saying is it's the process of how we got here, or at least what science says. It can say nothing about our value as individual people or as a human race as well.
Have any attempts been made to draw out a moral or philosophical system from the theory of evolution?
Unfortunately, the evolutionary worldview has been used, even misused, to have a very significant negative impact. And that actually comes very, very close to home. Back in the Victorian era, it was considered that some of the darker races around the world were lower life forms, that Caucasian races were more evolved. And this is unfortunately very, very true of the Aboriginal communities and folk that we know, where literally Victorian English people saw them as half animals, to be very specific and frank. Put them in chains, didn't treat them, saw them as people who could be killed without any moral consequences.
Regrettably, these seemingly innocent stories of ape-like men creatures were eventually used to support the theory of evolution. This theory suggested that all humans had evolved from apes. The theory then posited that some human races were more superior than others, that some of the races were more like apes, whereas some had advanced further. This unfortunately led to many believing that inferior races and inferior genetics should be eliminated. The theory of evolution throughout history has been responsible for racism, slavery, discrimination, mass deaths, and even attempted genocide. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, can a theory that produces so much pain and suffering and death really give us the true origins of life on Earth? In our last episode, we discovered that the probability of life arising on our planet without a grand designer is impossible. But the question remains, who is this designer? Well, a best-selling book of all time holds the answer to this very important question. This book is one of the most ancient records that has been preserved throughout history and has guided the lives of millions of people. The Bible. In fact, the Bible is comprised of 66 individual books, the first of which is called Genesis, which means beginning. This book claims to give the answer to the beginning of our world. And so it starts with these beautiful and poetic words. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the opening sentence of this book, we are immediately told the identity of this designer, God. Now, many people today are skeptical of the idea of God. But in fact, if we want to find an answer as to how our universe began, the only possible answer is that the designer behind it is God. For example, we know that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Our car exists because a machine in a factory built it. Our house exists because builders and architects put it together. Nothing comes into existence by itself. We also know that the universe began to exist, and that therefore the universe must also have a cause. But what could cause a universe to exist? We would need to find someone so powerful that they were not limited by space or time and could be outside of the universe in order to create it. The only person who fits this description is God. The Big Bang can't explain who or what caused the universe to begin to exist, but the book of Genesis tells us it was God. The story continues and we read something incredible. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This God is so powerful that he can simply speak something into existence. And so in 6 days, God carefully, precisely, and purposefully creates our world. On the second day, God divides the water in the sea and the water in the sky. On the third day, God separates the land from the sea and puts vegetation, fruit, trees, plants on the land. On the fourth day, God puts the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the other planets that we see into the sky. On the fifth day, God puts birds in the air and fish in the sea. And on the sixth day, he fills the land with all sorts of creatures that live there. But he's not finished yet. All of these things God spoke into existence. And at the end of every day of his creation, he looked at what he had made and he said, "This is good." Now you would think that after 6 days of creating the sun, the moon, the stars, the ocean, that God would have already created his most impressive thing. And yet, before the end of the 6th day, God is going to create the crowning achievement of his creation. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. God created the first man, Adam, with care, precision, and purpose. Unlike everything else in creation, which God simply made by speaking it into existence, God decided to take the time to get down into the dirt and intimately mold and shape Adam from the very dust of the ground. Very soon after, God also made Eve the first woman, and Adam and Eve were perfect counterparts to one another. God provided so much for Adam and Eve in the world He created for them. He provided them with food and water. He gave them marriage. He gave them one another. He gave them choice and free will so they could show love to each other and to God without being forced to. He even gave them rest, because on the seventh day of creation, we read the following: "Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it He rested from all His work which God had created and made." God had done all the work creating the world for Adam and Eve, and yet on the seventh day He invites them to join in the rest that He provides. But to conclude, let's focus on just two of the beautiful things that God gave to Adam and Eve. And the first is value. When God decided to make humanity, He said the following: "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. All humans, whether black or white, whether old or young, able, disabled, male or female, rich or poor, all are equal in the eyes of God. Every single person on this earth matters. They are all made in God's likeness and are His special creation. This is in complete contrast with what the theory of evolution teaches, that all of us are simply descended from animals, that we're animals, and that there is nothing inherently valuable or meaningful about us. It's this kind of thinking that led to many people being thought of as less than human, as human lives being dispensable. In fact, when many of those scientists who first studied these ape-men creatures were looking at some races of humans, often they assumed that people, such as the human pygmies, were nothing more than animals, and therefore did not have the same worth or value or dignity as other humans had. Early Christian writer Augustine wrote on the topic of the pygmies and said the following: "But whoever is anywhere born a man, that is, a rational mortal animal, no matter what unusual appearance he presents in color, movement, sound, nor how peculiar he is in some power, part, or quality of his nature, no Christian can doubt that he springs from that one protoplast, Adam." The second thing which God gave to humanity was purpose. When God created Adam and Eve and He put them in the garden, He didn't simply leave them to figure out what their purpose was. He told them directly why they had been made and what they were to do with their lives. God has a purpose for your life as well. There's a reason for why you are here on planet Earth. When you were created, God had you in mind and knew what you were going to do with your life. I want you to be encouraged, knowing that your life isn't meaningless, it doesn't have to be aimless, but that you can discover meaning and purpose to your life. I want you to be encouraged by the fact that your life does have value. You're not just some animal. You're not here by random chance. You're here by a design, God's design. And He places immense value on your life because you are made in His image and His likeness. You are one of His beloved creations, and you are very special to Him. You might be wondering to yourself, well, what is this purpose that God has for my life? Well, as we continue discovering in this series, we are going to look at what this purpose is God has in mind for us. And along the way, we'll answer other questions as well. For example, you might be thinking, if God created the world so perfectly, why does the world today look so imperfect? Why is there so much pain and suffering? How can I draw closer to God? All of these questions and more will be answered in our next episode.